Welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. We are back today with part two of a two-part podcast episode with James Mylett, who is the Senior Vice President for U.S. Digital Buildings at Schneider Electric. If you missed part one of my conversation with James, I urge you to go back and listen to that episode. That is episode 149. And if you have already listened to that, or if you want to start in reverse order, I hope you enjoy this part two, where James and I discuss additional leadership characteristics that are impactful for leaders today. James shares his words of wisdom for tenured leaders looking to evolve, as well as new leaders just starting out. Enjoy.
Now, I think another reason that you are well respected as a leader is you're very vocal about appreciating your team, but not just your team of leaders, the entire team to the front line and their role and their impact on your customers and the business. And to your point, the difference they are making every day. I know we were both at the Service Council conference in the fall of last year, and you made a statement there that make sure we're appreciating these people and vocalizing that. And I know you invest a lot of your time in spending time with the frontline workforce and understanding what their reality looks like day to day. So let's talk about the benefit of doing that a bit.
I think the customer's experience is going to be framed up by the interaction they have with our frontline employee, right? So when you think about whether it's the person that's helping with the coordination of the work, the follow-up on the billing, the actual work being done on site, the salesperson that's going out there, those moments of truth is what frames up the experience. Just like when you go to Starbucks, if you've got a barista that's friendly and engaged and all that, you have a different experience than the alternative, right? So I think for us, it's important that when we put our front line out in front of the customers, that they're in the right state of mind and they feel genuinely appreciated in what they're doing, and they understand how what they're doing is helping us. I was in New York City a couple of weeks back and I had a chance to meet with the head of security for one of the most iconic buildings in the U.S., let alone in the city. And I was expecting to talk about technology, facial recognition, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. No, all they wanted to talk about was Geo and how Geo would fix things on a Sunday before anybody even knew they had a problem. He got an alert about it. He was in, he did it remotely, he came in, and he just appreciated so much this frontline employee's personal commitment to making a difference for them. So in order for us to sustain that, we have to have a personal commitment to helping to clear a path for people like Geo to get their job done in a way that's meaningful for them. So mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't forgotten what it was like. So mm-hmm. It's been a long time, but I've got a long list of stories I could tell that, just you shake your head at some of the situations that frontline employees get put in some days. So I haven't forgotten that. And I think the comment I made at the conference as we were leaving was relative to the airline industry. And mm-hmm. We're all flying back. Don't forget, what those folks are going through as they're trying mm-hmm. to help us get home safely, and the interactions that some people are creating for them that makes their lives miserable. And it doesn't take much to be kind to somebody. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have quite a bit more to get through here. So, all right. So, willingness to take risks.
Yeah. So don't bet the franchise. That's one lesson I learned from a CEO I worked for. And a recent one that came up to me is try to go through two-way doors. So go take a risk, but don't take a risk in a way that's a one-way door mm-hmm. where there's no way back. So, and I'm not a fan of burning the bridge behind me so that there's no path, but the path forward, because the impact to the organization is huge. But part of what I've tried to do here in this role is to create more space for my people to take risks. We have a core value called Dare to Disrupt, that talks a lot about this specific topic. So I'm trying to create experiences with my team to where they know that because of the experience, they know that they have an opportunity to go take those risks. So an example I'd point to is we had one of our leaders decided that we wanted to open up a bigger operation in the city of Nashville. And so I looked at all the potential cities we could be going to, and I'm like, why Nashville? It doesn't make any sense. We should go someplace else. So I wasn't a supporter at first. I gave him a homework assignment to go get me the data, right? Trusting God, everybody else brings me data. So I had them bring me the data, and they proved the case out. I still wasn't bought in, and frankly, I wasn't bought in. But I gave them the runway to go do it, and they they crushed it. You know, they doubled the business, they doubled it again, and they're on this unbelievable trajectory of taking market share out there. And had I not been willing to take that move to create space for them, we never would have got the benefit. So I think it's for a leader, it's getting more comfortable being uncomfortable and trusting people more, and not building out an organization of helicopter parents to where people don't feel like there's an army that's hovering over them all the time, checking on what they're doing. So,
which I mean, really is another element of more modern leadership philosophy, right? You don't have to have your hands in everything. You don't, you know, you said you weren't really sold, but you let them do it anyway because they had conviction and you believed in them, right? So, you know, I think the first characteristic we talked about is resilience. And I think to some degree, if you want to build resilience in a team, letting them know it's okay to fail helps them be resilient, right? I mean, if they have this fear of failure, and obviously these folks didn't fail, you know, but I'm just saying your willingness to let people take chances lets them know that, you know, they can make missteps and course correct, and that fuels that sense of resilience instead of having this fear-based culture where then people don't want to try anything new, or if they try and it doesn't go well, they just want to quit, you know, because they don't understand that that's all part of the game.
Yeah, it's a storytelling that happens after the failure that drives the belief system. What happened to that team that didn't do what we expected them to do? How did we as leaders capture that? Did we treat it as a learning opportunity to get better, or was it punitive? You know, it's whatever we do is going to drive the belief system for the organization, and that's going to determine how people act after the fact. So, yeah, you know, trust comes in two flavors: character and competency, right? So, if you're on my team, it's because I trust your character, right? The competency thing, it just depends on the assignment, and you know, we're going to continue to evolve skill sets. All of us continue to evolve our skill sets, so the competency continues to go up. But yeah, I do. I trust my team. We early in the year, we were struggling with what our sales forecast was going to be, and my sales leader Alexis Hart was putting up a number that I was struggling. I wasn't sure we were going to get there, and I was like, "You sure you want to put that number out?" And she said, "I wouldn't bet against this team," you know, and it's just a comment that stuck with me that I haven't forgotten, and I agree with her. I wouldn't bet against the team.
And how often do you have a leader saying, you know, you're saying, "Are you sure?" And you know, she's saying, "Yeah, no, we should go with this," right? I mean, usually it's the other way around. They're trying to hedge bets or, you know, present a different case. So I think that's great. James, do you have a hard stop?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. All right. So the next characteristic, and you mentioned this in your comments, trust in God, but everyone else bring me the data. So analytical, but there's a balance here because you just said in that example, you're analytical and you wanted the data, but even when, you know, you aren't reconciled with that, you're still willing to bring these other characteristics into play. So trust in your team and the willingness to take risks, you know. So what role does being analytical play in all of this, though?
I want to make sure that our team is focused on root cause analysis for problem solving. And so, like most organizations, when you think about a problem, everybody wants to go to ideation. Let's go solve. And we spend not enough time defining what the problem is and then doing the root cause analysis and you've got brilliant people. Every organization I've worked with is popular with brilliant people. And you get in a room, and God help us if there's a whiteboard. Next thing you know, you've got all these great ideas up there. And then there's a program that gets deployed. And so my bias is to start at the problem or start with the customer and work backwards from that and put a solution in place that's supported with data that'll really move the needle, because you know that that's the root cause for the problem. What I've experienced along the way is you get these groupthinks, and next thing you know, there's a hammer that gets developed, and then leadership takes the organization on a scavenger hunt for nails. Here's a hammer, go find a nail. And our interactions with customers change, because it's no longer about helping them solve problems. It's about, hey, I've got this hammer and I need nails. Do you have one? And it's not a healthy environment. It's tougher. No argument about that. It's a lot of fun doing ideation, the brainstorming, all that. It takes hard work to really dig in and to get to root cause. And it takes courage to face into the data when it doesn't support what you thought the root cause was. And that happens a lot. And it happens to me a lot when you get into the data, because I've got my mind made up that we should be moving in this direction, but time out, let's go do the data. Then the data comes back and it doesn't support, what, as the leader, what I wanted us to do. What do you do at that point? Do you rationalize away the data, or do you trust your team, and follow what the data is saying? So that's my bias. The challenge is you don't want to micromanage the data. You don't want to get paralyzed by the data, but it has to have a role in the conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, in the example you gave about Nashville, it doesn't have to be the be all and end all, right? I mean, it's part of the consideration. It's an important, piece of the puzzle, but sometimes you might choose to take a risk against the data, or sometimes you might choose to weight that differently in your decision than other times, right? I do like the point, though, that you're not just talking about data for data's sake. You're talking about this idea of, root cause analysis and understanding what you really need to be investing time and energy in. I think that's the best use and maybe underused fit for, data in terms of, we're not just talking about measuring output or measuring, internal KPIs. We're talking about understanding the root cause of issues and opportunities and using that to guide a path forward.
Yeah, what's the problem you're trying to solve is probably one of the best questions you could have in your arsenal to ask, because people are bringing ideas forward. It's a simple question. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
It comes back.
Yeah. Simple question that doesn't get asked enough, right? Okay, so the next characteristic is empathy.
Yep. So I believe there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. And it's a line that as a leader, you have to be able to walk effectively. As we're dealing with it, so like we talked about the vaccine issue, as we were navigating through that internally, the government had issued this mandate that, if you want to continue to do business, you had to be in compliance. And when you run the math on that, it's a very simple decision. When you look at the amount of business that any organization might be doing with the government against the loss, for some companies, it could be crippling, right? Put them out of business. So from a math standpoint, it gets to be simple on that front. When you look at the people impact of it, not as simple, right? And for a lot of organizations, when you look at the population of people that have been vaccinated, depending on the state you're in, whether it's 30% unvaccinated or 40% unvaccinated, apply that to the population of the team you might be leading, that's a big number that you put at risk, right? So you get into this, but at the end of the day, for big companies that are doing a lot of work with the government, the math made sense to go forward with decisions to comply with the mandate. It doesn't change the fact that there are individuals that have been part of the family that have made a personal decision that we should respect, right? And empathize with, and keep that at the forefront of the way that you handle that situation as people decide to exit an organization. And not everybody gets that, it's because, you can get in a room looking at spreadsheets and convince yourself that this is just very simple, boom, it's done, move. But I think if you lose sight of the impact that the individual might not change your decision, right? Because you've got a business to run, but the way that you do that will communicate to the organization who we are as a company, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you put anything under stress, the characteristics of it come out. And you get in these situations, characteristics of organizations rise to the top and become very, very visible. It's a moment of truth, and we're fortunate enough to have a very clearly articulated set of core values, and it becomes a touchstone for us as we start thinking about how to handle any situation, consistent with the core values. So when we come out of this thing, we're better for it, right? It tested the team, it made the team better, and we didn't lose ourselves along the way, both as an organization and individually as leaders. It's I've had conversations with leaders that have gotten to that point where I'm listening to what they're talking about, and that's not the person that I know. It's not who they are, and it's a reflection point where they've lost themselves and they have to course correct,
Yeah. All right. A couple more are ambitiousness. So you said there should be a healthy distance between where we are and where we aspire to be.
Yep. Yes, I'm a fan of the Valvano speech, where I was, where I am, and where I'm going, that whole dynamic. We use the Hoshin planning process here, which is a pretty elaborate process. It's got this thing called an X matrix and a bowler, but the simple version of it is what we do is we do gap closure analysis. So we look at what best in class performance is on any metric, and we look at where we are, where we were, and how do I just get 30% better than where I am? I'm not going to get to there, but can I get 30% better than where I am? And if I did, what would that be worth? On any particular metric, whether it's recognition, safety, performance, employee turnover, customer sat. How do I get 30% better to whatever the best in class is in the metric layout? What we try to do is set those aspirational targets to where we know we're stretching ourselves enough, and we use a simple color coding where if I'm on the target that I said, it's green. If I'm worse than I was last year, it's red. And if I'm better than I was last year, even if I'm not to the target, it's yellow. And a successful scorecard doesn't have any red in it. It has a healthy mixture of yellow and green. That's a hard calibration for teams that they look at that and they want everything green. And the thing we've learned, especially this past year, is if everything's green, we haven't been aspirational enough. If you get a dose of yellow and green, we got better at everything. So here's where I was, here's where I am. Everything has moved forward. That's a successful year, because we continue to evolve the organization in the right direction. But it's a healthy, it makes for fun conversations. My belief and my experience has been that most of the leaders that I've worked with are exponentially better than what they give themselves credit for. Most of the teams that I've been involved with are exponentially better than what they give themselves credit for. And when you take the time to reflect back on what you've already done as a team or as an individual, it's surprising when you take that inventory.
I think too, there's people for whom this drive, right, this aspirational drive is just more natural than others. Doesn't mean people that aren't as hungry for it can't make that progress and be aspirational. But I think it's more innate in some folks. But, I do think there's this element of connection between some of the leadership traits we're talking about today and aspiration, because in a more traditional leadership model, again, it celebrates the intelligence, the capabilities, the results of the people at the very top without a lot of credit to those on the teams and on the front line, right? And I think the more that we, evolve into this more modern management mentality where we're celebrating the contributions of the team and we're considering the role of the front line and we're being more empathetic, I think it creates more ambition because, to your point, people are connected to that purpose. They're connected to the, you know, individual role they play in a big picture of a company that within the culture cares about everyone. And I think that causes people to be more aspirational instead of just more complacent, right? Or more disconnected or disassociated. You know, I mean, those values are something you can use to connect people. Like you said earlier, get the buy-in, and that creates more aspiration within the team.
Yeah, it's cultural, right? So when I think about culture, for me, I go back to the Oz principle stuff, and it's all about creating experiences that shift the belief system, that get people to act in a different way tomorrow than they're acting today, that delivers the result that we're looking for. It's a very simple model. So as the leader, what are the experiences that I'm creating, and are they consistent with the belief system that the organization will need to hold in order for us to move in the direction we want to move on any topic, whether it's diversity and inclusion, you know, customer satisfaction, retention, hyper growth, you know, all those key things that we talk about. The model applies for all those. So I think being purposeful about the experiences makes a big difference, you know, for us. So I get a report out every month, the end of every month, on our net satisfaction scores for the whole organization. And my exec assistant goes through and teases out all the 9s and 10s that we've got. And we've got a recognition portal here that we use. And once a month, I see everybody that got a 9 and a 10. And I recognize everybody on the team. If nothing else, just to let them know that I see what they're doing and I appreciate it. And again, you know, back when I was a frontline technician, if I was getting a note, you know, from the president of the division or a senior vice president, it made a difference. And so even if it's not me, if it's just a title, it makes a difference to people. And I think we underestimate that sometimes when we get to these positions, just the impact that we have on lifting people up.
All right, last question on the traits, and then just a couple of things to wrap up. So authenticity is the last trait that I have on the list. And what is it that you think makes a leader authentic? You know, I mean, you know, that feeling you get when you're engaging with someone where they either are or they aren't. And I think it's something people get a sense for so quickly, and that doesn't mean it can't change, but it's just something that you get a very initial impression from someone when you engage with them, that they're either very authentic or you know. What do you think that is?
I think agenda makes a difference. I mean, my agenda is to help teams win and to help people who want to get better. I mean, that's simple as that. I think the light went on for me back in 2004. I was in New Orleans leading a business and got challenged by the mayor to get involved in the community. So I went and signed up with the school district there to do some stuff. And I got invited to do a leadership conference at Frederick Douglass High School in the inner city. And one of the things they wanted me to do was to bring my quote that, you know, represented who I was. And so the reflex was be true to yourself, right? So, and what I didn't know was who that was attributed to. So I looked it up, and crazy moment, Frederick Douglass, right? So
what are the chances?
Serendipity moment for me, right? So and the more I kind of reflected on that, I think that's kind of been my guidepost along the way, and probably even more so since that light went on for me. And I think that sets the stage for the authenticity piece of it. I think, you know, the imposter syndrome piece that I talked about earlier, and you know, and as I work with some of the resource group, they talk about code switching and that whole piece. I think there's some of those things that you have to navigate through on that path, but you know, I think at its core, it's being comfortable enough with with who you are, to where you can bring the best version of yourself into any situation. The key is, are you a part of an organization that is willing to create an environment to where you can do that? And I think as we all talk about the war for talent, as people get experiences with organizations or see game film on organizations that are doing that allow them to be their best version of themselves there and to be their genuine self there, the tolerance level for the environment that they might be in that's not that goes way down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like I always say that none of us realized how miserable a yellow cab ride was until Uber came along. We just kind
right.
of with it, right?
Dealt with it.
And then all of a sudden it changed. Well, I think as organizations evolve and we're more purposeful about creating these environments and people see it, tolerance level changes in other organizations. I think progressive organizations, it's going to be a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. All right. So you talked a little bit so we've talked through these traits. You talked a little bit about you personally have evolved your beliefs and your methodologies and the way you lead. Are there any practices, resources that you would give in terms of how you do that? Like, how do you continue personally to evolve and grow and educate yourself and, change as a person and a leader versus just kind of sitting still?
I do a lot of mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the thing that's top of mind. And I tell the folks I work with that I get more out of it than I think they do, because I get insight into what's driving them, what's motivating them, what's demotivating them. What is it that we're doing that's making a difference, that's resonating? Where are we missing the mark? Where do we think we're moving the needle and we're really not?
Mm-hmm.
What's important? And all of those things, that whole inventory that I just rattled off, what I'm experiencing today is different than what I would have experienced 20 years ago or even 10 years. So, I think as a leader, getting that insight, going close to where the front line is, puts you in a better position to make decisions about where you go forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, use a cough. I got this non-COVID related cough.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, take a drink, whatever you need to do. No, I think I shouldn't be surprised by that answer, because it's just very representative of you as a person, meaning you're not just picking up a book and all of a sudden it's changing you. Not that I'm saying you haven't read good books, I'm sure you have, but the real change, the real perspective for you is coming from that engagement and those conversations and being hands-on and being personally invested. And I think that's actually really cool. All right, so two final questions. One is, so what advice would you give a peer who has committed to improving and evolving their own leadership style?
I think for me, taking inventory of where you've been and where you want to get to is a good starting point. When we talk about leadership style, it's having clarity around what you want that to be and what you want it to represent. Excuse me. Otherwise, it's difficult to understand whether or not you're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we talk about collaboration, for example, it's something that's top of mind for all of us as we think about expanding out into the industry and creating new relationships. What are the specific skill sets that I could be developing to be more effective on that front would be part of it.
One more question and then we're going to be all done. Okay. So last question is, what advice would you give a brand new leader who's just starting out? So looking back on your own journey, what words of wisdom would you share?
I think if I had it to do over again, right? So let me come at it from that perspective. When I look at the investments I made in my personal development to become, the best technician I could be, it was nonstop. I was reading all the time. I was getting on the right assignments, all that stuff. And that opened the door for me to move into sales and then into management. My early stages of management, I didn't make that same investment in me. And I didn't recognize that there was a whole new set of skills that I needed to go develop. There were attributes that I had built out in the prior roles that put me in a position where I was ready for the first leadership role. But there was a whole nother set of skill sets that needed to be built out for this new role that early on I didn't recognize that. So the advice I would give people is to recognize that you've just promoted yourself into a new position, a new journey for yourself personally. Get the inventory of the skill sets that are going to be required in order for you to excel at this new position, and then go put yourself on a learning path to get those acquired and built out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good advice. And it echoes the point you made earlier when we were talking about having hard conversations and, you know, the culture of, you know, wanting to hold each other accountable and things like that. And you said, you know, we have to understand as a company, have we invested in the skills for our leaders to do this? And so it's a very two-pronged thing. I think it's great when someone has the personal recognition and takes, you know, the initiative to continue their own journey of self-improvement. But on the other end, you know, companies have a responsibility to invest in the skills of their leaders as well. And I think sometimes what happens is, you know, companies promote to a certain level and then that just stops, right? And it's, you know, there's a statistic I read not too long ago. I think it's like 70% of companies don't invest in leadership training and development, you know, because it's just assumed that by the time someone gets to a point of being a leader, like they know it all or something, you know, I don't know. But the idea that being proactive as an organization as well of the continual learning is equally important. So
when you think about individual contributor positions, there's so many certifications that people have to have, you know, to work on certain systems and all that type of stuff. But then we promote people to a manager, and we don't think that there needs to be the same level of certification, right? So we just assume. And so for an individual, one of the things to recognize is your talent is part of what got you to the position you're in. Your success going forward is going to be on whether or not you build out the talent to become these overarching skill sets that you have. But the talent will only take you so far. And it's, you know, the place where I see leaders derail most frequently is when they get to a position where they're managing other managers. Because, and let's take sales, for example. Let's say I'm a top salesperson, hit my quota, blow it out of the water every year. Next thing you know, somebody taps me on the shoulder, you should be a sales manager. Great, got a big title, just got promoted. And I don't invest in being a good sales manager. What I'm doing is I'm helping everybody on my team close deals because I'm unbelievable at it. So next thing you know, the performance of the team goes through the roof because the closer is in there helping to bring in these jobs. I get tapped on the shoulder again. You're a great manager. Now let's have you manage all the sales managers. I'm done because I never built up skill sets that I'm going to need to manage other managers as I go forward. And it's the highest point of derailing in careers is that manager layer. And root cause of that is we don't spend enough time building out the skill sets along the way. And so again, another piece of advice going back, if I could do it over again, is at each one of those turns in my own personal leadership pipeline, is calling a timeout, really doing the inventory of, okay, now I'm managing other managers. Now I'm managing an enterprise. What am I going to need to go here? I was managing a region, 25 branches at one point, and it was a couple $100 million. I did the market analysis, and you know, if we got the 10% market share, we would have been $1 billion business. So I called my coach to come spend some time with me, and you want to know what's the topic? I said, well, I got a $300 million business. I want to take it to $1 billion. I think I can get there. I have no idea how to manage $1 billion business. You know, I don't know what that looks like, and I don't want to be the person who builds something that they can't run.
Yeah.
Because I didn't grow as fast as the business grew.
Right.
You know, so at that point, the lights had gone on for me to where I was at least self-aware that I had the confidence level where I could take it from X to Y by when, but I had the awareness that when job is different than the X job. And so I need to get to work on building out, you know, version 8.0 of me.
Yeah, I love that. So I think just in summary, I mean, there's a couple points that I want to touch back on. And the first is, you know, you said early on, the pace of change today is incredibly rapid, right? And so if leaders aren't evolving, you're making yourself irrelevant, right? I mean, it's really not an option at this point. Like you need to be investing in yourself and expanding horizons and looking for different sources of inspiration and educating yourself. And, like you said, mentoring has been a great source of understanding what's needed today. Or do you have your own mentors or a coach or, whatever those tools are, just the understanding that it's necessary, right? And I think the second thing is, keeping the eye on not just the short term, but the long term. All too often, I think leaders that have that recognition have great intentions, but then they're so overcome by the day-to-day demands of the business that they're not strict enough about taking the time to invest in themselves to make themselves better in the longer term. And I think, you also mentioned that long-term view being important. I think that applies not only to the business, but, to the individual, in the sense of, you have to figure out a way to create the time and effort and space to work on yourself, so that, to your point, when you take the business from here to here, you're ready to continue, making an impact.
Larry Levin wrote a book called Top Teaming, and in it he talks about how leaders have to find the right balance between the now, the new, and the next. Mm-hmm. And they always have to be working on that. But the thing that's changed is change speed. Let me share just a couple of quick stats with you. So when you think about cars, it took 62 years for cars to get to 50 million users. It took credit cards 28 years to get to 50 million, debit cards 12 years, PayPal 5 years, and then Pokemon Go got to 50 million users in 19 days.
Wow.
Right? So think about that change. And mm-hmm. when you're working with team members who grew up in a world of Pokemon Go that went to 50 million in 19 days, it's a very different perspective about how fast things should move than folks that, grew up when we were talking about whether or not ATMs were safe or debit cards or, virtual bank. Think about all that change and just how fast it's moving today. It's dramatically different. And so we have to adjust our leadership style. We have to adjust the environments that we're creating. Otherwise, we're not going to attract and retain the talent that's going to be needed to win in these new markets.
Yes, I love it. James, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to have you on and have you share some of your story with us. So thank you very much for being here.
I appreciate the invite. Always a pleasure.
Yes. You can learn more by visiting us at futureoffieldservice.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn as well as Twitter at the Future of FS. The Future of Field Service podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.